Hi, my name is Riley Haas. I'm a Canadian author. I'm the author of 3 books, and I'm working on my 4th, which is about something called the just world fallacy. And today I'm going to talk about that phenomenon in relationship to the rise of the Republican nominee for president in 2016, Donald Trump. The rise of Donald Trump has been one of the more unexpected events in U.S. Electoral history. If you throw your mind back to last summer, Donald Trump becoming the official nominee of the Republican Party for President of the United States of America seemed laughable, and no one thought it was actually going to happen. Remember, he ran for the nomination of the Reform Party back in 2000, and he was out of the race by the February of 2000. And last summer, 538 pointed out that never in recent U.S. history has someone who was a frontrunner a year and a half out from the election ever actually won the presidency. So it seemed like there was not a very good chance that this was going to happen. The thing about using the past to predict the future is that it works until it doesn't. Now we know that Donald Trump is the Republican nominee, and he's actually somewhat close to Clinton in the polls in a way that we never would have guessed. So why the hell is this happening? For the people who support him, I guess it's happening because of the reasons you support him. You're upset and you're not sure what to do about it, and you think that voting for this asshole is somehow going to solve those problems that you're experiencing, the things that you're mad about. But those of us, the rest of the world, as well as Democrats and hopefully lots of independents, are kind of wondering, why would people actually support this man who is well, there's lots of reasons why he's unfit for the job. And the fact that we think we need to even list them is kind of insane, because he's just, I mean, look at the way he behaves. Can you imagine that man doing anything in the Oval Office? But anyway, imagine him trying to write policy. Not that a president actually writes policy, but anyway. I like to say this to people about politicians. You shouldn't just vote for the candidate who you could sit down and have a coffee with, but on the other hand, you might want to think twice about supporting someone you couldn't even have a drink with. Frankly, Trump strikes a lot of people as the latter kind of person, the kind of person you couldn't even have a meal with. There are a lot of people who would claim they could have a beer with him, but they would be surprised when they actually sit down with him to find out that he's a blowhard in real life as well as on TV. And for those of us who have met blowhards, we know that they're insufferable. Why a blowhard is popular, why a blowhard is the Republican nominee for president, raises all sorts of questions in the minds of those of us who are not currently drinking Kool-Aid. For example, how will he deal with leaders from other countries? If he never shuts up and he never lets anyone else speak and he never listens to anyone, how can he ever negotiate anything? I know he says he's a great negotiator, but he doesn't listen to anyone. So how can he possibly actually negotiate things? He doesn't know where other people stand because he doesn't listen. How could he negotiate? This doesn't make any sense. He doesn't listen to people. How can he take advice from advisors? There's no magic wand where people are just capable at things and can do everything and they're perfect and they're geniuses. The idea that, CEOs, brilliant CEOs run companies into huge amounts of success is not true. It's a myth. It's a myth that's been debunked many times. You can look into it. The well-run organizations, private organizations, are run by people who listen to other people, who find ideas that are better than theirs and adapt them and use them. Finally, this is a man who's had the financial freedom to fail catastrophically in business whenever he wants. And what happens when he's doing that with your tax dollars? Or worse, when he's doing that with the lives of your children, or your brother, your cousin, the soldiers that the U.S. seems to feel the need to deploy into combat all the time. It's bad enough the way things are now, but imagine this gambler making military decisions with your relatives, and possibly, if you're of age, in the army, your life. I think these are fundamentally reasonable questions, and they don't come from partisanship. Because listen, this guy's not a true Republican, and I'm no supporter of the Democrats, but it comes from kind of, I don't know what the answer to these questions is necessarily. I don't understand how people can look at this man and say, this guy is going to solve our problems. First of all, making something great again is just rhetoric. But secondly, even if you believe silly rhetoric like that, if you're young enough or naive enough to believe that this is the way the world works, which is not the way it works, why this man of all people? He's furthest thing from an optimist, it seems, except for when it comes to his own infallibility, it seems. An important part of all this is that it's all about his image of success as opposed to his actual success. Many people have noted that had he passively invested his parents' fortune, he would be 2 to 3 times more well off than he is now. So he's actually done worse than he would have just by investing in very standard conservative stocks in the stock market and done nothing else. He is worse off. He is not good at managing his money. He has numerous failed business ventures. Some of them absolutely spectacular. Trump Steaks. I mean, if he had been born poor, he would not be rich. There's no way he would be rich. He wouldn't have even had all these other ventures. He couldn't possibly. But he's playing with house money. It's the saying, the old saying. He's born on third, and he thought he hit a triple. But that's not what happened. What he is successful at is branding. He's convinced everyone, or a very, very large chunk, way more people than I could have ever imagined, that he is a success when he is not actually financially successful. I've never watched The Apprentice, but I know people have watched it and they see him. Do you think this is how a real successful businessman behaves? What about the other successful businessmen? The successful businessmen are the ones who aren't so desperate to be in front of everyone on TV. They certainly don't behave like this. I think you probably, if you ask around, lots of people who know people at the very least who are who know successful businessmen and women, and they don't behave like Donald Trump does. You can see I'm kind of frustrated by this. But the one thing that gives me consolation in all of this is that I feel like I really don't know where he stands at all. I don't know what his policies are. And I think that he's probably a lot more moderate than he sometimes makes himself out to be, because he's from New York and because he's frankly been centrist or even associated sometimes with leftist center people and ideas in the US in the past. It's not the first time that a Republican candidate has thrown himself as far to the right as possible, at least in some areas, in the case of Trump, because obviously he's not right in all things, in order to win the nomination. And though Trump is known for saying whatever comes into his mind during this campaign, he's also not known for being a hardline conservative. So, if you go back to when the primaries were still going on, you could look at Ted Cruz and say, frankly, Ted Cruz is, if you're coming from a perspective that, these types of policies are crazy and not based in reality, which I think is fair, frankly, Republicans, that Cruz is worse than Trump. This is the power of populism. We don't know what the populist can do, Trump being the populist. And so that's why he's appealing, because you project your own things on him. He contradicts himself, and so you decide what Trump is thinking, and what Trump's going to do, and that's why he's appealing. But that's actually scary, because you don't know what he will do, and you don't know what such a thin-skinned man with such tiny, tiny hands will do when some diplomat or some leader from another country says he has tiny hands because he thinks it's funny, because it's funny. How does Trump react to that? Do you want someone who is still bitter about a nonsensical joke from over 30 years ago about his tiny hands? Do you want that man to have the power of nuclear weapons? I don't. I think that's terrifying. Anyway, regardless of whether or not he's more centrist than he currently comes across, I still want to know why people are supporting him. I'm inclined to ask, like, aren't people smarter than this? Can't people see that he's inconsistent? Can't people see that he really just says whatever comes into his mind? And can't people Google the fact that he's not actually a successful businessman? I mean, I have. It's documented. It's not like this is some secret knowledge. We can all find it out for ourselves. So let's talk about some theories. One popular theory is that the US election process is a cycle. There are periodic upsets to this cycle, and this is just one of them. I think this is a really odd view because the US political process is, frankly, not that old in its current form. In the scheme of things, it's not that old, and it feels old to us because, I'm 35 and you're however old you are, and none of us have been around as long as the US political process, so it feels old. But the idea that the presidential election process moves in cycles because it moves in cycles is idiotic. It may have appeared to move in cycles in the past, but there's literally no reason why it should move in cycles. Like, what determines that it moves in cycles? And we may see patterns, think we see patterns, but they may not be there. And I mean, like, why would the US presidential election move in cycles? Like, there must be some kind of economic or other exogenous determinant factor for that, and I don't know that there is. So here are some questions that, what about the US presidential election is really cyclical? And what possible democratic connections, or changes rather, could possibly cause the US presidential election to be cyclical? I'm going to go in a little diversion here, but in the world of music criticism, there is an idea that music moves in cycles, and it seems really appealing. So we got rock and roll, that was followed by the British invasion, and then folk rock, and then psychedelia, and then prog rock and art rock, and country and pop rock at the same time, and then punk rock came around, which was supposedly a revival of rock and roll in the British invasion. Excuse me. And then post-punk, which was a revival of art rock and new wave, and jangle pop, which is a revival of folk rock, and then neo-psychedelia around the same time as jangle pop. And then eventually we got grunge, which is a revival of punk rock, and Britpop, which is a revival of British invasion, and alt country and things like that, which was a revival of country rock. And then we got eventually post-punk and new wave revivals of post-punk and new wave. But that was actually cherry picking on my part, obviously. There have been lots of other genres throughout that time that may have not been revivals. And if we look closely, there's no actual pattern there. There seems to be some kind of pattern where children grow up and discover music that are made just before they were born and then make music inspired that some of the time. But if we think there's actually a pattern and there's a cycle there, we're just projecting on it. There's no actual pattern. So I think the same thing is true in presidential elections. I don't see how there's actually a pattern. I think people want to see patterns.